which she was one of the first to contend. Mrs. Woodhull cleared the way for leaders of agitation for equal political rights, alike in America, this country, and elsewhere. The younger generation knows not the indomitable leader to whom their enfranchisement owes so much. She it was who blazed the trail for those more insurgent leaders who finally won victory. Victoria Woodhull rose to fame in the early 1870s for championing a variety of causes. A woman of first, she was, as her obituary claimed, an early leader of the first wave movement. However, by the mid-1870s, feminists of her time, such as Susan B. Anthony, had markedly distanced themselves, believing her to be a discredit to their cause. Modern-day feminist historians, too, have generally obscured Woodhull in the scope of first-wave feminism because some of her ideas are seemingly difficult to resolve. In my longer essay, I cover Woodhull's oft-controversial views of spiritualism and free love. For today's session, I will focus on her ideas on free love, views that were as misunderstood then as they are often misread today. By critically reading Woodhull's words on free love within the context of her personal and political circumstances, it is understandable why women of her own era had a difficult time accepting her, and why modern historians have had a challenging task in explaining her. However, what is evident is that though her contemporaries shunned her, her views indeed aligned with what was laid out as the goals of first-wave feminism as they themselves recorded in the Declaration of Sentiments of 1848. Woodhull was born on September 23, 1838 in Homer, Ohio, to Reuben and Roxana Claflin. During her childhood years, Woodhull had to work hard in order to help care for the large Claflin family, which limited her schooling. It was during her young life that the Victorian era began both in England and in the United States, and that the women's movement in the U.S. was formalized at Seneca, New York in 1848. The spiritualist movement also swept America beginning that year, a movement that Woodhull would be involved with, including its derivative, the free love movement. In 1853, at the young age of 15, Woodhull, with the permission of her parents, married Canning Woodhull, a 28-year-old doctor who was later revealed was an alcoholic. Within a year, their first child, Byron, was born with a mental handicap, for which she blamed both her tender age and her husband's debilitating alcoholism. In a bid to move him away from temptation, Woodhull relocated her young family to San Francisco in 1855, where she worked a variety of jobs as the household provider. However, in 1859, with the country on the precipice of the Civil War, she returned with her family to Ohio, reportedly at the bidding of a spiritual vision of her 14-year-old sister, Tennessee. Woodhull joined her sister's traveling spiritualist show as a leader to help her in earning money to support their family. Indeed, at this time in America, such shows, especially those run by women, were anything but uncommon. In the midst of this show, Woodhull gave birth to her second and final child, Zula Maud, a healthy baby girl, in 1861. The show brought the sisters to St. Louis, where Woodhull would meet spiritualist, reformer, and Civil War veteran Colonel James H. Blood, who, like Woodhull, was married. The two divorced their spouses and married each other in 1866. In 1868, Woodhull reported a vision from her spirit guide, the Greek orator Demosthenes, who informed her she must move to New York to begin, quote, the work she had to do. Woodhull, from a young age, had felt a connection to the spirit world, and had been anticipating such guidance from the Greek statesman, whom she had known since the age of 10. In her earliest biography, released in 1871, she details an early revelation of her destiny from Demosthenes. She would rise to great distinction, that she would emerge from her poverty and live in a stately house, that she would win great wealth in a city which he pictured as crowded with ships, that she would publish and conduct a journal, and that finally, to crown her career, she would become the ruler of her people. The prophecy had stayed with her through one city crowded with ships, San Francisco. However, it was only when Woodhull, her sister, husband, children, and various other family members arrived in New York in 1868 that Demosthenes' early predictions manifested. In New York, the spiritualist sisters attracted the attention of the wealthy and elderly Cornelius Vanderbilt, who was fascinated by their connection with the spiritual world. It was this that eventually led him to lend them the money they needed to set up the first brokerage firm run by women on Wall Street, Woodhull, Claflin & Co. Following this, on April 2nd, 1870, she announced her candidacy for President of the United States in the upcoming 1872 elections, the first woman to ever reach for this position. The sisters then set up a newspaper, the well-read Woodhull and Clapham Weekly, as a way to disseminate her views as a presidential hopeful. The paper was a hodgepodge of free love, women's rights, and various other social movements, such as communism. In fact, the sisters printed the first English version of the Communist Manifesto in the United States. In 1871, Woodhull submitted the Woodhull Memorial to Congress to make a case for women's suffrage. She declared that the 14th and 15th Amendments that had made it illegal for states to forbid former slaves from voting inherently allowed women to vote, as they too were citizens. She presented this before Congress on January 11, 1871, becoming the first woman to ever speak before a joint congressional committee. This argument impressed Susan B. Anthony and other early feminists. However, as the campaign continued, she lost favor with many, as some of her views and her reception in the press drew too much negative attention to the women's movement. Woodhull's support of free love garnered her much of that negative attention. She gave a speech on free love entitled "A Speech on the Principles of Social Freedom" before a packed audience in New York City in November of 1871. Her views drew criticism from the famous Reverend Henry Ward Beecher. His half-sister Isabella reported that he described Woodhull as, quote, "a pseudo-banker in Wall Street, and her opinions are immoral and dangerous." Woodhull lamented, "The public press, either in real or affected ignorance of what they speak, denounce free love as the justification of all manner and kind of sexual debauchery." The reaction she attracted indicated this was the interpretation. Thomas Nast, a famous cartoonist, published a caricature of Woodhull in Harper's Weekly as Mrs. Satan, a bewinged and behorned harpy, trying to lure a mother down the seemingly nefarious path of free love. The wife, carrying a drunken husband and 2 children upon her back, refused her offer. Feminists also viewed free love as destabilizing to their movement. They worried the popular definition of free love as an approval of promiscuity would confirm fears of some that the women's movement sought to break down the ideal family of 19th century separate spheres and true womanhood ideology. Anthony would withdraw all support from Woodhull's presidential run for fear that the association with her would mar the respectability they had gained since its conception in 1848. The Free Lovers had emerged from women in the spiritualist movement, who were conflicted about the role of marriage and its subjugation of women. Spiritualists and those who valued free love were not the only ones questioning matrimony. The Declaration of Sentiments, as written in 1848, also drew attention to its inequalities. They detailed grievances of marriage, including the legal right of a husband to institutionalize, beat, divorce, and claim the wages and property of his wife. They resolved that they would work in whatever capacity available to them to give women the same rights and status as men. Anne Broad correctly states that for historians, free love is a problematic term because it was more frequently an accusation leveled at others rather than a positive self-identification. At the time that Woodhull made her speech, she viewed free love as more than a positive self-identification. A reading of her words in the light of the Declaration of Sentiments demonstrates her actual alignment with first-wave feminists, whether they acknowledged it or not. In her 1871 speech, Woodhull covered a variety of subjects related to what she termed social freedom. This included discussion on marriage, prostitution, education for women, and sexual relations. She also considered the interference of government in human relationships. To love is a right higher than constitutions or laws. It is a right which constitutions and laws can neither give nor take, and with which they have nothing whatever to do, since in its very nature it is forever independent of both constitutions and laws, and exists, comes and goes in spite of them. Governments might just as well assume to determine how people shall exercise their right to think or say that they shall not think at all, as to assume to determine that they shall not love, or how they may love, or that they shall love. Certainly, this could seem like a statement implying the loose morals that are often associated with the term of free love. However, this is not what Woodhull was trying to convey. Rather, she was making a statement on the laws of Victorian America that controlled marriage and divorce. Woodhull, as a twice-married woman, understood the complexities of the wedded world. Arguably, by the logic of 19th century laws and certainly by Thomas Nast's visual rhetoric, Woodhull should have remained Canning Woodhull, a man who spent their money on alcohol and prostitutes. It is logical that she would champion a cause that did not constrain women to a specific husband if that person was not able to fulfill the role of provider. This assessment by Woodhull is not an attack upon marriage as many of her era believed. To be sure, within the speech she does state that this love of which she speaks can be within or without the binds of matrimony. Yet, it must be noted that she herself chose marriage in her own life. What she was advocating was the freedom of choice and freedom from governmental interference. It is unsurprising that first-wave feminists, like Anthony, would not want to associate with someone who seemingly threatened the underlying construct of Victorian society. However, she was in fact supporting what they had listed as their goals of equality for women within relationships. Woodhull pled, "The false and hollow relations of the sexes are thus resolved into the mere questions of the dependence of women upon men for support. The sexual relation must be rescued from this form of slavery. Women must rise from their position as ministers to the passions of men to be their equals. Their entire system of education must be changed. They must be trained to be like men, permanent and independent individualities, and not their mere appendages or adjuncts, with them forming but one member of society. They must be the companions of men from choice, never from necessity." This aligns with the demands of those first-wave feminists. Within the Declaration of Sentiments, they demanded that women move beyond the confines which, quote, "corrupt customs and a perverted application of scriptures have marked out for her." Woodhull also argued that women should not be forced to remain within the confines of a loveless marriage. Rather, they should be educated. She related in her first biography that she partially blamed her son's disabilities upon her lack of education on sexual relations. From this experience, she became convinced that no woman should be put in a similar situation, in which they were uneducated on all facets of a wedded life. This sentiment, it would seem, supports the first-wave desire for a woman to be happy and fulfilled. Ladies of the first wave, like Susan B. Anthony, had difficulty in accepting her among their ranks because the popular press focused on the most outlandish aspects of Woodhull's life. Within the speech, Woodhull drew a lot of attention at her time and among what later writers could declare. "I am a free lover. I have an inalienable, constitutional, and natural right to love whom I may, to love as long or as short a period as I can, to change that love every day if I please, and with that right, neither you nor any law you can frame have any right to interfere." With a statement like that, it is understandable that the first-wave feminists retreated, already victims of accusations that they wanted to break up the domestic sphere of middle-class Victorian respectability. A historian or reader of the entirety of the text would come away with the realization that Woodhull, despite saying this, was arguing for the rights of women to be equals of men, not just in public, but at home. Under this banner of unrespectable free love, Woodhull was still arguing for the rights that first-wave feminists had declared to be their cause in 1848. Her declaration as a free lover who could change lovers every day certainly seems destabilizing, but it was a hyperbole. Indeed, later in the same address, she stated that for her, she was, quote, "fully persuaded that the very highest sexual unions are those that are monogamic, and that these are perfect in proportion as they are lasting." It is notable that she does not say marriage at this juncture. However, in practice, she chose matrimony over simple monogamous relationships. She undoubtedly would argue that although it is her right to choose a lover if she may, her education and her place as a businesswoman and public speaker put her on equal footing with men. And as such, if she chose to marry one, that was her choice, and no one, not the law or society, should interfere. Despite her steadfast support of women's rights, the attention would fall upon this, support of free love, and would lead to Woodhull's arrest and the trial of the 19th century. Indeed, in 1892, Isabella Beecher Hooker would tell Woodhull's third husband that her, quote, "work of 20 years ago on the suffrage movement was forgotten, while her attack on Henry Beecher was not." Woodhull had said in November of 1871 that, If a person believes that a certain theory is a truth, and consequently the right thing to advocate and practice, but from its being unpopular or against established public opinion does not have the moral courage to advocate or practice it, that person is a moral coward and a traitor to his own conscience, which God gave for guard and guide. Within a year of this statement, Woodhull had been made the candidate of the Equal Rights Party. However, on Election Day of 1872, Woodhull was not campaigning. She was instead jailed along with her sister and Colonel Blood under the Comstock Law for having printed and nailed a multi-page obscene article detailing the alleged affair between Reverend Henry Ward Beecher and the wife of his parishioner and friend, Theodore Tilton. Beecher had been expected to introduce Woodhull's speech on free love at Steinway Hall, but when he failed to show, Tilton had given the introductions instead. At the time she had given the address, she was fully aware of Beecher's indiscretions, but was persuaded from disclosing them immediately. Just a year later, financial stress, in part caused by her support of free love, while Beecher remained a successful closeted free lover, caused her to lash out. The article led to Tilton suing Beecher for alienating the affections of his wife, the proceedings of which lasted throughout 1874 and 1875 and were followed by Americans nationwide. Over the next 3 years, Woodhull toured the United States in a bid to earn back what she had lost defending herself after her arrest. The trial that she had set off attracted audiences throughout the country. In 1876, she was once again nominated as a candidate for president. However, like in 1872, she never made it to the ballot. In that same year, her newspaper folded and she divorced Colonel Blood. A year later, in 1877, Woodhull and her sister, with money rumored to be from Cornelius Vanderbilt's son, moved to England with their mother and Woodhull's children to begin a new life. There, Woodhull continued her speaking tours through 1878, during which she met a wealthy English banker, John Biddulph Martin. Martin came from an affluent background, and when in 1880 his family was alerted to Woodhull's former activities in America, it nearly ended their engagement. However, after a great deal of strife, the two were married in October of 1883. In England, Woodhull ran a newspaper between 1892 and 1901 called The Humanitarian, which among other things advocated eugenics. Woodhull had been speaking on eugenics since the early 1870s, influenced by her experiences with her own disabled son. It was in part on this platform that Woodhull, now Martin, returned to America in 1892 to once again try her hand as a presidential candidate, though for a third and final time she failed. Woodhull returned to England with her husband, where she would continue to write and speak on the plight of women, even after her husband's sudden death in 1897. In the intervening years between her husband's passing and the end of her own life, Woodhull remained active, though nowhere near the bustle of her life in the 1870s. Following his death, she retreated from her Hyde Park home to an estate left to her at Redlands Norton, 125 miles northeast of London. Woodhull did not stop her history first later in her life. She was, in fact, the first woman to drive an automobile through Hyde Park. And in 1904, she helped to establish the Ladies' Automobile Club. She tried to help the children in the area around Redlands Norton, providing a short-lived school, as well as donating time and money to other causes, including letting the Boys Brigade have a camp on her property. She did not forget her American roots and worked towards promoting good relations between the two countries. She secured the transfer of the Solberg Manor, ancestral home to George Washington, to hands that would make it open to the public after her death on June 9, 1927. In an unpublished work in 1895, Woodhull reflected upon the harsh treatment she had received for many years, concluding with, "I feel well assured that whatever be the misrepresentations to which I may be subject at present, the event must be committed to time, who relentlessly unravels all distortions and rights all wrongs." This is the goal of the modern women's historian when confronting Woodhull, to correctly represent her. Her words and her background make it understandable as to why feminists of her time felt the need to distance themselves from her. And further, her general lack of involvement within organized feminist movements later in England led to her obituary remembering her as the indomitable leader unknown to the early 20th century feminists. Yet, a rereading of her own words leads to the understanding that what she was defending and demanding was in line with the goals of the first wave movement. She just stretched beyond their desire for suffrage. She sought out equality and justice in all aspects of life. She was a woman ahead of her time, but she was also in an environment that needed a voice and activist like hers. She demanded what others surely wanted. She just did so through movements that were often misrepresented. What is overwhelmingly evident is that Victoria Woodhull was a first-wave feminist in the spirit of the movement as first written in the Declaration of Sentiments, and she should be remembered as one who indeed blazed the trail for rights we enjoy today.